Alright, we're starting with part 2, solving absolute value equations. So I'm going to start with number 5. You have 2 times the absolute value of x over 7 equals negative 5. Now I always tell my kids when doing these problems, guys, is you want to get the absolute value by itself. You want to isolate it. So for this problem, it's kind of like, treat it like if this was an x, like if you had this, how would you solve this? You would want to get x by itself, so you would divide by 2. Here, if I want to get the absolute value by itself, I'm going to divide by 2. So I get x over 7, absolute value, bring the absolute value down, equals negative 5 halves. Now that you have the absolute value isolated, this is where you split into your two cases. The first case is where you drop the absolute value bars. The second case is you drop the absolute value bars, stick it in parentheses, and put a negative out in front. So here, what you can do is you can cross multiply. There's two ways. You can cross multiply to solve. What I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply both sides by 7. Why? Because they're dividing, so the opposite of division is multiplication. So then you get x equals, when you're multiplying fractions, guys, top with top, bottom with bottom. So 7 times 5 is negative 35. 2 times 1 is 2. This is your first answer. And then here, what I'm going to do is I want to get rid of this negative sign, so I'm going to divide by negative 1. So you get x over 7 equals positive 5 halves. I'm going to do the same thing, multiply both sides by 7. 7 times 5 is 35. 2 times 1 is 2. These are my answers. All right, let's go to number 6. Very similar problem. I have a minus 5, and then under the absolute value is 8 equals 5. All right, same thing. I have to get the absolute value by itself, so I'm going to multiply both sides by 8. 8 times 5 is 40. Once I have my absolute value, I'm going to split it up into two cases. So a minus 5 equals 40. Negative a minus 5 equals 40, right? Drop the absolute value bars, drop the absolute value bars, but this guy is replaced with a negative. So with case number 1, I'm just going to add 5, so I get a equals 45. For case number 2, there's two ways you can do it. You can just, now because you drop the absolute value, you can now distribute. You can distribute to parentheses. You just can't distribute when the negative is before, right, up here in the absolute value. But here you can, because I already did my two cases. So you can distribute the negative, or you just divide both sides by negative 1. Either way is fine. So you get a minus 5 equals negative 40. Then I'm going to add 5, so a equals negative 35. That is my answer. All right, two more. We're going to do 8 and 10. So let's look at number 8. This one's really tricky. I have a lot of kids that always get confused with this one. Now, a lot of the kids want to add this or subtract this. You can't do that yet, guys. Rewrite, if you want, rewrite it like this. This means the exact same thing. Do y'all see that? Because you just have a 5 sticking out. So, it's kind of, I always tell my kids, like, evil math guy's trying to trick you. He wants you to, like, smush this or do something weird. This is the same thing as adding 5 to the end. So if you want to see it like that, that's fine. If you wanted to get rid of this 5, you would have to subtract 5. So another scenario, it looks like this. Like if I have 5 minus x equals 10, right? This is just kind of a little side note. Same thing here. If I wanted to get x by itself, I'd have to subtract 5 first. So just be careful with that. It looks really weird, but don't worry about it. Don't worry about it making it more complicated than what it is. All you're doing is just putting the 5 at the end. So if you want to rewrite it like this, you can. I'm going to subtract 5 first, right, because of PEMDAS, because I want to get the absolute value by itself. So I get negative 8 times negative 2, absolute value of negative 2n. Negative 75 minus 5 is a negative 80. And then right here it's being multiplied, so I'm going to divide by negative 8. So I get the absolute value of negative 2n equals a negative times a negative is a positive. And so 80 divided by 8 is 10, positive 10. So now that I have my absolute value by itself, I'm going to split up into my two cases. Case number 1, drop the absolute value. Case number 2, drop the absolute value and stick parentheses with the negative in it. And so here I'm going to divide by negative 2. So n equals negative 5. And then a negative times a negative is a positive, right? So this will be 2n equals 10. Divided by 2, so n equals positive 5. You guys, you can always, if you're not sure about something, always go back. You can check here, plug both numbers in. You can check here, or you can even go back to the beginning equation, plug in your n, check there to make sure you got it right. All right, let's work out number 10. Number 10, I have x minus 7/3 equals 6. All right, so here the absolute value is already isolated, so we don't have to do anything else besides go ahead and split into its two cases. So I have x minus 7/3 equals 6. That's case number 1. And then case number 2 is a negative out in front. X minus 7/3 equals 6. So here I'm going to add 7/3. This guy drops, so I get x equals, okay, we have 6 plus 7/3. Guys, do not use a calculator, right? Because you're going to get funky decimals, and then that just makes Miss Mornes really sad. Pre-cal, you won't have a calculator for like the first semester, so we need to get used to fractions. You guys remember from elementary school, when you're adding fractions, you have to have a common denominator. So how do you find your common denominator? You multiply the bottom two. So 3 times 1 is 3. That's my common denominator. Now I'm going to look at this first guy. 1 times 3 is 3. What I do to the bottom, do to the top. So 6 times 3 is 18. And then here, 3 times 1 is 3. What I do to the bottom, do to the top. So 7 times 1 is 7. Now when you're adding fractions, the denominator stays the same. Before we were multiplying. When you multiply fractions, you multiply top with top, bottom with bottom. But when you add fractions, you have to add the top and the denominator always stays the same. So 18 plus 7, that gives us 25. So my answer is 25/3. All right, here I'm going to move the negative to the other side. So I get x minus 7/3 equals negative 6. If you want to distribute, you can do that as well. Then I'm going to add 7/3. I'm running out of room here, so I'm going to do it down here. So I have negative 6/1 plus 7/3. Well, it's the same thing as what we just did here, right? 6/1 is the same thing as 18/3 with the denominator of 3. So I'm just going to put the negative version of it. And then negative 18 plus 7 gives me negative 11/3. So my answer in this case is negative 11/3. All right, that is video 2.